website and to publicize the fact that Graciela is a native Spanish speaker, and so we have the capacity to assist as well with her talent. So let's go to the next slide. And what I want to mention to you also on these slides, as well as talking about what trafficking is that we have here this PowerPoint for you, and LaShawn can email you the PowerPoint if you want. So you don't have to, scramble and take tons and tons of notes. If you want to, this PowerPoint is available for you at the end of this presentation. So we're going to start out today. We're going to do something different. So this is the first time Graciela and I have done this, so please be patient with us, but we're doing one slide to introduce the topic of human trafficking. Then we're going to read the scenario that LaShawn sent to you. And then we're going to do the entire rest of the presentation, bouncing off, touching, explaining, working on helping us to understand the scenario through the life of a person, through the life of Elena. So we'll be going back and forth on that. I hope you had the opportunity to look at it. And if you didn't, don't worry, we will keep mentioning various aspects of it, and then we'll go as far as we can go. Needless to say, this training is going to be less than an hour, and we can do a half a day, a full day training on this topic. We'll be touching on a lot of things. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and we're going to be asking you questions as well as we proceed. So we want this to be very interactive and to be a conversation. So let's start out and just say, what is human trafficking? And we say modern day slavery because it is not necessarily rooted only in the American experience of slavery. In fact, I would say it's not. Since the beginning of time, humans have enslaved other humans, have forced them, have exploited them for work. And in our world, what we have seen and what the law has changed to allow for is the definition of slavery and of trafficking to include something we call invisible chains of psychological coercion. So that when you think of slavery, often you do think of shackles or bars or things that people are enclosed in an area and they can't get out. But in fact, a housekeeper can be enslaved and still take the kids to the bus stop every day, or go to a store, or go to church, and still be bound by these invisible chains. Sometimes we call it being in a prison without walls. That's why they can't escape. We talk about slavery or servitude in any industry. And also, one of my big things I always like to mention to people, and it's so important. A lot of times people hear human trafficking, they only think of sex trafficking because of whatever it is, because of SVU episodes or the movie Taken or whatever. But know that globally we see more labor trafficking than we see sex trafficking. And this is really a reflection, I think, of a lot of different things, including the kind of relative ease of doing sex trafficking cases, arrests, prosecutions, etc., to labor trafficking. Anyway, know that human trafficking is both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Okay. So our next slide is, we're going to talk about a scenario, and that is to talk about Elena. And as you bring this up, you can read along with me. Elena, 24, is a Black woman born in Guatemala. While there, she helped her family by cleaning houses with her mother. Elena came to the US at age 15 because she was threatened by gangs with sexual assault, and her parents wanted her to be safe. She has minor developmental disabilities and has had some high school level education, but did not graduate. Over the years in the US, she had occasional work doing in-home housekeeping, where she'd live at her employer's house and sometimes lived on the streets or at the Carney Center. She's undocumented. She's addicted to drugs, and sometimes she has sex with men to support her drug habit or for food and a place to crash. Last year, during an NA meeting at her church, a man approached her and offered to get her a job and a place to stay. She liked the way he treated her, and she introduced him to her friends. After dating her for 3 months, he said she had to have sex with his friends so he could support them both. Next, he advertised her for sex online, and in the ad said, she will wear gloves and a mask. He sometimes ordered her to clean apartments that he owned to earn her keep. He threatened to call ICE, tell her parents that she is a prostitute, and would to send compromising pictures of her. and get her deported if she didn't do what he wanted. So she complied. After being with him for 8 months, she left and is being housed by the Kearney Center. She is afraid he will find her and call ICE. She's worried she has COVID-19. She can't sleep and is anxious, depressed, extremely compliant with case managers, always promising to do things like work on her GED, but does not follow through. She is ashamed and does not want to contact her family. Okay, next slide. So you can go through all 3 of these elements, LaShawn, and you might have to hit it 3 times. So this is my first question for you all. And if you could please in the chat, give us your responses and your thoughts. First of all, do you think Elena is a survivor of trafficking? And let me explain what trafficking is in detail. And this is based on the law. And as I'm explaining this, you can answer in the chat box. So somebody who has been trafficked has had one of these things happen to them. They're recruited or they're harbored, they're kept someplace, they're moved, or they've been obtained by force or fraud or coercion. It doesn't have to be all 3 of those things, unless the person is under 18. And then if somebody is a minor, you do not have to show force, fraud, and coercion for sex trafficking under federal law or for sex or labor trafficking under Florida law. And then there's some sort of aspect of commercial gain. And what that means, the purpose is really that someone is getting money or someone is not having to pay for something they'd normally have to pay for. So, so what do we have in terms of the chats? Do we have people saying, let's see, yes, yes, absolutely, yes, yes. Okay, so when you think of this, why do you think she's trafficked? She's vulnerable economically. Yep, that's right, Jude. And someone has leverage. Someone has that kind of control that you talked about. Absolutely. So that's right. Let's go to the next slide. And what I want to do is distinguish for you too what the difference is when it comes to on this next slide, the difference between human trafficking and smuggling. So I could have said to you all, so do you think she's smuggled or trafficked? And I think this is a savvy group, you would have gotten it, but here you need to understand these kind of differences, because I will tell you up until this day, despite as much as we've seen about trafficking, people get this wrong. Understand that trafficking is a crime against the person. It's involuntary. It's based on exploitation. You don't have to cross a border. In this case, Elena clearly did. And the commodity is the person, and the goal of it is an exploitation of the purpose of the person. If you're smuggled, you will have agency. You decide to cross the border. You say, I want to go across the border. I'll pay you to do this, and you'll move from A to B. Transportation is involved. There has to be a border crossing. You need to know that here in Tallahassee, somebody could be trafficked by just, in someone's own home. And so know that you don't have to cross a border for trafficking. You absolutely do, and for smuggling, and that the commodity is transportation. So while Elena might have been smuggled, it's clear that since she has been here, that she's being trafficked. Okay, let's go to the next slide. It's so great to be with you all today, because when you talk about who's being trafficked, what we see quite often is that the only thing, and people say, what is the quality of someone? What is the, what is the deal with trafficking? Well, the idea is that a trafficking survivor is someone who has a vulnerability, who has had some kind of vulnerability. So when you think about Elena and you think what her vulnerabilities are, I was making notes earlier. She is an immigrant. She does have substance abuse issues. She has minor disabilities. I don't know that you could qualify her as a runaway or homeless youth, but it's possible when she was 15 and got here. We don't know about her mental illness, but we certainly have in this scenario that she's anxious, that she's depressed. She probably does have some issues. I was sharing with LaShawn and Graciela, just preparing for this today. I wrote down the word trauma next to every place in the scenario where she could have been traumatized, and my page is just literally littered with the word trauma, because there is so much trauma here for her. We don't know if she's LGBTQI+. can assume that she is a survivor of abuse, because even in this trafficking scenario, if nothing happened to her before, which is highly unlikely, we see that she is a survivor of abuse at the hands of this trafficker. She's clearly economically insecure and is part of an underserved population. You know, one of the things that it's also important to realize that is the term intersectionality. We recently had a program on assisting in underserved populations, and we know all the time that it's not just one of these things that impacts. We haven't even said, is she a woman or a female? Because females, women, and girls and children are at higher risk of being trafficked. That's another, because a lot of places they are treated as second-class citizens and do not have the access to power and to economic well-being as males do. So, so we know that this is the case, and all these issues around this. We know that intersectionality is a big issue. Okay, all right. So let's go to the next one. I want to just ground you a little bit more on some of the basics. I think I recognize some of you here, and I know that you've had some of these programs. So the next slide shows Florida. And you should know that Florida is third in the nation when it comes to human trafficking. So LaShawn, we can go to that next slide. And I want to use my cursor and go next, and it's your screen and I can't do it. So you can see that Florida is third in the nation. I mentioned this, so it wouldn't be a surprise to have Elena here in our area. You can see the orange spots are the hot spots. This is kind of even an old map. I know that if we had another map, we'd see a lot more. And you know that in this case, it's possible that she was trafficked before. I see that in the chat when she worked for people in their houses. But we know that in this case that her trafficker is forcing her to have sex and also forcing her to clean apartments. So we have the 58 people in 2018 who were both sex and labor trafficked. And I mentioned this too for you all, because sometimes we see that people are in the, you know, maybe are sex trafficked. And I'll tell you, there are numerous studies that have shown that particularly most recently, there was one out of Arizona that showed kids, minors, who had been sex trafficked. About a third of them were sex trafficked and labor trafficked. And then some, when they described their trafficking situation, I said youth who were sex trafficked. I'll say the study was youth who were trafficked. And about a third of them were only labor trafficked. So it's another kind of problem with this assumption that all human trafficking is sex trafficking. We can really miss incidences of labor trafficking, abuse, and exploitation. So in this case, that's where we see Elena. The next slide gives us some good news, and I'll tell you one of the—
There is a question.
Yes.
I want to address that. I don't understand the non-specified. Patricia is asking.
Oh, yeah, non-specified, and that means that, and let me also explain that the numbers for that map came from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-37-37-888. Not specified means that when they made the call, that they could not determine if somebody was sex trafficked or labor trafficked. So it's like a question mark. That's how, or the person did not want to disclose it, or the details didn't come in enough for them, I guess, within the hotline to know that. Thank you. And yeah, possibly a language barrier. You're right, Rhonda. So, and this is great, Graciela. Thank you for monitoring the chat. We'll do that when we switch off. It's hard to do it.
It's a lot of work here. Woo.
You know, double tasking. It's not good to do that. So, and then, you know, we don't have a lot of data on human trafficking. In fact, it's really hard to figure it out because this is such a hidden phenomenon, right? And even in your service provision, I'd say sometimes you might have assisted someone who's trafficked and you never reported it because you thought maybe the needs were getting addressed in some other way, or maybe you thought somebody else reported it. But one of the places in Florida we have to look is our DCF hotline. And of course, we're all mandatory reporters. And reporting to the hotline if you suspect a child is sex or labor trafficked is a mandate for you. You can see that the numbers have gone up over the years from 43 in 2009 to over 2,100 in 2018. So know that this is an important fact to keep in mind. One of the things, okay, the next slide, and is to talk about COVID. So this is a lot of words on the page, and it's totally violating every rule of PowerPoints. But since we're doing it by Zoom, I'm just gonna let us flow with this for the moment. And Graciela and I want to talk to you about this. So, so just understand, you could read some of these points, but know that human trafficking is still happening. One of the things we know, whether it was Hurricane Michael 2 years ago, or any other kind of political unrest or natural disaster. Think about Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. These are times of great vulnerability, right? And so when we talked about, you know, that in Guatemala, when Elena left, there were conditions of gang violence. So she left there because of the instability. So here we are in our culture right now. And it's not just COVID, it's also all of the unrest in the streets and people getting out and maybe perhaps recently getting out and being forced to work in unsafe conditions. Please know that trafficking is happening. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that the reports are down. I heard from a TPD officer last week that reports of child trafficking, child sex trafficking in particular, are down. DCF reports the same thing. And why is that? We don't have mandatory reporters seeing kids, right? They weren't in school at the end of the school year to even make those reports. We know that traffickers, and we'll talk more who they are they could be one person or they could be an organized crime entity. They're very nimble during crises. They can get out and they can force people into doing jobs and work that is unsafe. And one of the fact pattern issues here, when we wrote in here, she will wear gloves and a mask when Elena's trafficker was advertising her online. That's directly out of an FBI report a couple weeks ago out of New York, which is how traffickers are now advertising, sex traffickers are advertising victims online. They're actually saying, yeah, we'll make them wear masks and a glove so you're safe. Right? So this is not stopping. We think it's more underground than it ever has been. And know some of the intersectionality issues around trafficking are, for example, with domestic violence, say domestic violence victims can't get out of situations. We know that the numbers are reported to be up in DV situations. And that traffickers are also DV abusers. Traffickers force their victims and their family members to have sex and to work. So they can be both, trust me. And so we know that those numbers are down, and we're concerned that when things really open up, that there'll be more of an explosion of cases. Graciela, you wanted to say
I
something
wanted
about,
to tell the advocates that now with COVID-19, we have to be creative to see our clients and to have, you know, keeping in touch with them. And one thing that I have done is communicate with them via WhatsApp, which is an app that a lot of people have in case that there is no Zoom or computers available. And it has been so successful. So then again, you know, we have this pandemic, and advocates, we kind of, we are plastic, and then we accommodate to whatever the circumstances are. So be creative is the point.
exactly.
And I think the next one is mine.
Absolutely.
So before we move forward, we have a bunch of questions in the chat. Do we want to answer them now or at the end?
Yeah, let's answer a couple. One, Mindy asked about should 896 abuse for suspected adult trafficking cases. If it's a vulnerable adult, yes. Know in Florida that we do not have mandatory reporting for human trafficking unless the person is a vulnerable adult or a child. And however, and we have a slide on this at the end, if you suspect human trafficking is going on and there's an emergency crisis, somebody in immediate danger, of course, that is a call to 911. If you're not sure and you suspect it, you can call STAC or you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline, that 888-37-37-888 number, to discuss it. In fact, over the last couple of weeks, STAC is a referral agency on the national hotline. We have gotten calls from the hotline where people from here have called and said, can you help somebody? So, so that's there. No, let me mention to you on session, we do not see that there is an increase in human trafficking here during session. It's one of those things where people may be conflating prostitution and trafficking. So maybe there is an increase in the sex trade, or maybe in prostitution that is voluntary or not coerced by a trafficker. Again, another subject we could go into for more time, but there is no real connection between those two that we have ever seen and that I've seen reported. Let's see, and I think those were the questions, LaShawn. Good, okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so it seems that this group have been realizing about trauma and oppression. Can we go to the next slide? And let's think about what Elena case is. So she has been highly traumatized. First of all, she was threatened by gangs to have, to be sexually assaulted. She possibly was bullied at her home country because the developmental disabilities, possibly. And also a lot of people don't know this, but we do have racism and classism in other countries like Latin America, Mexico, and other countries. And probably she was also bullied by her color. So then she's coming with already some issues here to United States, and then she's trying to incorporate to a culture that has homophobia as well as in her country. And she has been oppressed and will be oppressed because she is undocumented. We haven't established how much English she knows. So that's not possible, like somebody said, language barrier. So we highly recommended to approach your clients with trauma-informed care. Hopefully you guys tell me if you know what is trauma-informed care.
Yeah, could everyone raise their hand if they've had training on trauma-informed care oh, that's very good. You do it for your pictures as well, and you can do it also under the reaction tab at the bottom of the screen.
Okay,
so I love it. Thank
great.
you. You can do
a lot of people are saying yes. So,
all right.
So that's how we approach also our clients. Can we go to the next one? So what is the perspective of a survivor or a victim? Putting ourselves in the shoes of somebody else that has been going through that, we just barely can see some retos. I am thinking now in Spanish, interesting. I'm thinking about the victim's perspective in this case, challenges. So it could be language barrier, of course, shame, about what has been happening to her, fear of going with the immigration, or fear to the police, and whoever have been trying to help. If she comes to a service provider as the Carney Center, for example, that she was, it's possible that she had a very short, brief interaction with a provider. So it's not enough. And at the same time, it is possible that she doesn't identify herself as a victim. Because if you talk to her while she is having and dating that boyfriend, she will say, no, I am not a victim. This is my boyfriend and this is what we are doing. So any attempt to said, you might be trafficked, or you might be, we know of other people that are in the same circumstances, she probably will say, no, that's not my case, and I am happy with this guy. So it's not that people don't want to be rescued, they just don't know that they are in that situation, possibly. Remember that human trafficking is also a transaction where you are thinking, for example, in labor trafficking, thinking that they are paying you, but then the trafficker take the money back to pay the debt or to pay other things, housing or whatever. So there's is this kind of a lying, and then you are in that situation where you're thinking that actually you are being paid, but it's not true. So and then please raise your hand if you know what is Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding. So then I can go to the next slide. Okay. Everyone say yes? Yes?
Yeah,
Yes?
yeah.
Okay,
Patty
perfect.
first. Yeah.
So basically is, when you have formed some unhealthy bonding with a trafficker, where you think is actually protecting you or doing that, this is a good thing for you, but it's not healthy. Okay, so sex traffic indicators. Probably most of you have heard that there is some kind of branding. Some traffickers brand their victims. And if you are talking to one of the victims, it's possible that they have unusual number of sexual partners, and they might possibly think that they are being tracked by the trafficker, which is possible, or through the phone or whatever, or possible not. But what is important is they believe that they are being tracked. And they, of course, is going to be presenting with multiple STDs, on abortions, if you can go all the way, to have a conversation with them. And nowadays, this sexually explicit content on social media, it's hard to distinguish, because a lot of people are doing this. However, if you put everything together, you can kind of start figuring out that this person has some indicators of is being sex trafficked.
And you know what, Graciela, as you're talking, one of the things I'd like to mention to people as we go to the next slide is that you might not know, you will maybe only suspect human trafficking. I mean, very, very rarely. We work with people, and we are always putting together various red flags and trying to figure it out. So these are all clues that you might see, and they're kind of little pieces of a puzzle that get put together, that if it's possible that it's trafficking, then, that's when you can call STAC. That's when we can work together potentially. But know that these are all different. Everybody's different. Every situation is different. And this may not be trafficking, but if it is, then, that's when a call to STAC is great. And that's when you might be able to know this about the client you're working with, to know how you might be able to help them further.
Yeah, that's why before it was a question about well, if Elena was living in the same place as she was working, then it's trafficking. And I said, not necessarily, because that is a good indicator, but I think you have to have more indicators. So that's why I wrote that. So what happens when you are in a labor trafficking and then you are also sexual assaulted? That's very possible with any person. And the indicators are right here. Remember that I just completely forgot what I was going to say. I remember now. It doesn't have to happen to you, but if you are witnessing other sexual assaults to other people, is an indicator. It probably is 3 people with us in the same apartment, and you haven't been sexually assaulted, but you are seeing that somebody else is sexually assaulted. You know that could happen to you. So that's also important to mention. And again, if you are in a labor traffic, then suddenly, the person goes to the doctor and has STDs or has other indicators, it's possible that this person also is being assaulted. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So labor trafficking indicators, I don't remember, I don't know if that was Patricia or who, that, again, you live in the same place as you are working. That's one indicator. You don't have breaks. You cannot bring people to the house. Yes, it was me. Hey. And then you have limited food and water. You don't, of course, the debt that you have, that you are being paid, but the money is getting out if you are being paid, because sometimes they don't. You don't have access to your documentation. You don't have access to your passport or IDs, or it's like you don't have the freedom to leave the house and go and work in another place. There is something that you are being holding there. And of course, the people that we have seen, people that are working in circumstances where they are supposed to have protective equipment, but they don't, because the traffickers are not going to spend the money on that. It is finally, remember that traffickers are probably, we can go to the next slide.
Can I stop you for a sec, Graciela?
Sure.
One of the things on your scenario, you might notice we have several questions. And one of the questions we had, the second question, we could probably ask everybody now and ask them to answer it, which is, if she was trafficked, and I think we've all agreed that she has been trafficked, how would that impact? And I know we have several of you on the call who are would provide services to Elena. Would that matter to your service provision, and how would it matter? So if you could take a moment and think about the scenario and think about the needs that she has, whether or not you're from Disc Village, or maybe you're here from the Kearney Center or from Hope Community, CCYS. Like if you have seen Elena, would it matter to what you do to know that she was trafficked? And if so, how would it matter? And I almost wonder, if you don't want to chat it, why don't you unmute yourself and just, why don't we have a bit of a conversation? Is that okay, LaShawn? She's muted, yes.
I like it.
It wouldn't matter. Okay, it wouldn't matter. Okay, Jude, let's talk about that a little bit. Now, if you knew that she could get an immigration benefit, and I'm phrasing this wrong, you would still provide services, but would the knowledge that she's trafficked be beneficial for you in providing your services? I think that's what I'm mostly getting at. And how do you think it would make a difference to your provision of services?
I would want her to try to get some type of counseling. I want her to get whatever helps her to remain stably housed. I work with housing. Whatever keeps them in the apartment and doing well is whatever I want to do.
So a counseling situation might be one that would address the feelings that really spring from her being trafficked, right? We certainly know that we've seen healthcare providers say, oh my gosh, everything fell in place when I learned that this person was trafficked. All of her physical symptoms, what was going on, it made sense to me now as I understand this, right? What about the rest of you? What do you think?
I think the knowledge of it would open up various opportunities, and especially counseling, coming from a school academic standpoint.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
If not having the knowledge, obviously we're going to be able to assist her in many ways. But if a student is not working in their classroom or having anxiety issues, or they're appearing traumatized in any shape, form, or fashion, it would open up opportunities, like in our school anyways. We have counselors that are available to these students, and sometimes having that knowledge that opens up other doors for them and other benefits and opportunities.
Okay, great. And that could be a student of any age.
That's correct.
Yeah. And what about the fact that she's undocumented? Would her being, we haven't gotten to the slide, and I don't know that we have talked about legal remedies, but knowing that she's trafficked, I can tell you could be a big benefit if she's undocumented and might have legal relief, right?
Right.
There's something called a T visa or a U visa, where that could also be helpful.
Exactly.
Anybody else have any observations about the services that you provide, if knowing that the person is trafficked is going to be a benefit, a plus? Grant funds available to serve trafficking survivors. Absolutely. Absolutely, Patricia. That's great.
So anybody? For CHS, of course, the age of Elena at the time would be important. Mm-hmm. Because we would only be able to assist if she were 17 or younger. But with that, she could absolutely come into care, and we'd be able to look at the stabilization and then involve any providers that can help stabilize her and get her to a place where she can be fully functioning and successful. So that would include the legal remedies, if staying in the country is the best option for her, any legal remedies with that. But having seen it, it is a hard, it's hard, because you really have to deprogram all of that stuff that was programmed into her, bless her heart, in order for her to understand that life does go on, and her life can be much different than her experience.
Exactly. And your outreach to others in the community, and exactly what you're talking about, is why we're having this program, right? So that we can all collaborate together on that. STAC also does have funding through a federal grant with the International Rescue Committee to provide direct service support. So say you are seeing somebody who needs housing or needs payment of tuition or legal fees or counseling, healthcare. We have support to get that funding, direct funding and support for survivors, and to work with you to provide that. So really wanted you to know that as well. So as we go through this, if you take the time to talk to, and maybe call Graciela and say, is this person possibly trafficked? We can do joint intake, or we can do, a conversation, so that we can figure it out, essentially, and provide that joint case management and direct support for services. Okay, Graciela.
Okay. Well, we were talking about the traffickers, what they want, what they are pursuing is money, of course, and they want to get less risk, more money. The people are commodities, and the traffickers really could be anyone. And it is sad to say that even families and mothers and sisters are being traffickers and trafficking family members, as we know from the paper, and here in this area has happened. The first time that I work with victims, actually they were survivors of human trafficking, the family, whole grandmother and uncles and aunts and everyone was complicit with the trafficking. So it could be family, it could be organized international crime, it could be diplomats, as it says in there, and labor subcontractors, which is really hard to catch. It could be somebody that owns a restaurant. So that's, I want to make sure that you are careful with the translators that you reach, because the translator, if they don't have training on trauma, it's going to be hard for them because they're going to be listening a lot of things. And two, who knows if that person is related with anyone that knows the trafficker. So then, it has to be somebody that, the Human Rights Center at some point, we're working with a list of translators, but we don't want to call somebody that is related with the trafficker. And the next slide is what.
Before we go, can I jump in on something really fast
Sure.
here, Graciela?
Yes.
So y'all have to know we present together and we do this all the time. We just jump back and forth and complete each other's sentences sometimes. But on this point of business people and professionals, I wanted to bring up the Evans family farm case, because some of the questions we have at the bottom of your scenario is, how would services be different if she was white, if she was a US citizen, if she was transgender or had disabilities? But on that issue of if she was a US citizen, let me tell you that one of the worst cases we have had in Florida is the case of the Evans family farm, who trafficked African-American homeless men who were substance abuse dependents. They were substance abusers. And what they did was they went around this farm, this fine upstanding farm family in Palatka went around to our state's homeless shelters and places where homeless men and women, principally men, congregated under bridges, etc., offered them a job, 3 hots and a cot to come and work on the farm. And they also promised them drugs and crack cocaine, and to pay them in drugs and alcohol. And they would collect these very vulnerable men, some veterans, take them to the farm and enslave them. And they were discovered when the DEA went up to that farm after they'd been called to say that there was human waste being dumped into the St. John's. DEA went up there, saw what was going on, called the FBI, and the FBI went in and investigated and found a huge human trafficking operation, huge forced labor. These were US citizens. So I only say that to know that whether or not Elena is an immigrant or a US citizen, this happens to everybody. The vulnerability is really what is important to focus on. And they definitely targeted the most vulnerable and people in the homeless population who, when they went missing, very few knew that they were being missed. Extremely tragic and sad. So that's just another way to really address those questions 5, 6, 7, and 8, which we'll talk about as we go forward. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we already talked about the some of the needs that Elena has. One thing that I always emphasize is safety planning. That's the first thing that I focus is right now. If I see her, wherever I am, whether it's in the church or in a hospital, I focus on safety. What is the situation where she is right now, and how can I create a safety plan with her? So like Rhonda is saying, safety is first. One thing that I have been doing a lot, especially with very young people, is to address the information that they are giving in social media. Be careful with that. I always address that because traffickers are there, are preying on the information that you are putting on, or the people are putting on, and then they ended up knowing you, and they know what you want, what you need. And so then it's important part of the safety planning, always talk about that. Of course, she needs a lot of these things here. I have been noticing that unfortunately, survivors and victims of human trafficking they have a lot of issues, healthcare issues, because they haven't been eating well, they haven't been sleeping well. Probably they, as we said, they were sexually assaulted. So from dentist appointments to whatever it needs, this is another thing that we need to consider. And of course, the immigration support, Robin was saying that, an attorney probably would be important to contact. That's what we do. We contact services. And if one thing that he mentions here is that she was taking NA meetings at her church. So it's possible that, faith community can come along and then help her. So she has a lot of needs that we can keep addressing little by little, because it's also, in my experience as an advocate, I have a lot of ideas to offer, because we give information and then they decided if they want to do it or not. But a lot of ideas can be also overwhelming. So we need to kind of go prioritize safety planning, possible counseling, housing. It depends on the situation. And I'm sure that you have been in that situation too, like the one that I'm saying right now.
So this is a good time also to ask that third and kind of fourth question, which is to say, so you see some of the survivor needs of Elena here listed. Could people in the chat write what you would provide to Elena if, say Stack found out about Elena and we needed to contact you, or you needed to contact other agencies? Start out by saying, what would you be able to provide to Elena from where you sit now? If you could put in the chat.
Real quick, Elizabeth has a question that I think is super important, so I don't want to miss that. Because I know as the time is going by, I want to make sure we hit that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Elizabeth. I see that now. Thanks, LaShawn. Yes, both immigration and, as I mentioned in the Evans Family Farm case, U.S. citizens, we haven't mentioned for working with Native Americans from reservations. I will tell you that that is probably the most vulnerable population in our whole, in our whole country, and all of the populations we deal with. There is a lot of attention to it out west. We would certainly welcome the opportunity to work with you, Elizabeth, or anyone you know on this issue. We have had a case. Graciela has dealt with a Native American here in Tallahassee from another tribe out west who needed her documentation, and it was really big. So yeah, so absolutely. And LaShawn talked about maybe we could do a part 2 to this. I would love to do a piece and even invite someone from a tribe to speak to this issue. And I think that because, again, going back to vulnerability, going back to economics, going back to the colonial oppression issues that we talked about at the top, there's great need to that. Elizabeth, thank you for bringing up.
Yeah, during my regular day, I work at PACE, but I also work with the Indigenous Nursing Program at FSU, where we're trying to do more health research. And one of those is I've become a HIV counselor with the Department of Health, and we go to powwows and different events. But one of the things I come up with is there's not as much, because reservations are separate from the state and stuff, there's a lot of gaps. And so I was wondering if that's something that, not necessarily now, but I would be able to get some of my supervisors from FSU that maybe we could do something
Great.
in the future.
Our contact info is at the end. I'd really love it if we could talk. And
Oh, I will love it.
let's
That's
figure it out.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
that's great. Okay, so going back to our question, what would you all provide? And consider that maybe you could have provided help to her when she got here at age 15 and through age 24. What would you do? You can put it in the chat. Is the chat not working anymore? Do you all want to just say? I think what services would be available through your agencies?
Well, I put in the chat, and it wouldn't be from my agency, so I would have to do a referral. But in my, like, just hearing like all the coercion that she's already been through, and being that she came through as an immigrant, she might not like know much of anything. I would try to do like an assisted living or a daily living type person with her in the beginning for monitoring. And that person could also watch who's coming around her as well from her past. And then like to just, help her do daily living. She might not know how to write a check. She might not know about scheduling, just something to get her like on that path of optimal function, like to get her as close to one piece as she possibly could be, but with knowing that, these things have to be worked on a daily basis, because that's the first sign that you don't go back to living back to your old way.
Okay, great. Great. That's excellent. Absolutely. And Justin talks about walking her through employment and housing issues beyond 21, connecting her with services. What else? Who else is with us today? Other service providers?
This is Rhonda at Pace. As far as registration and schooling, as long as she's 18 or under, I would be referring her to our intake counselor so that we could assess that. If she's over 18, then we would have to look at other options.
Okay, great, great. And know that at any time, STAC is available to help you with any of these issues. So let's go to the next slide. We've just got a few minutes left and we can wrap up. So this is one that we always get asked, what do I do? And you are service providers, you are people caring in the community, but you're also neighbors, you're also people who are walking down the street sometime. And just keep this in mind that if you see danger, there you go, 911. If you have any questions, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And again, and need help, that's also a tip line. They'll connect you to local services wherever someone is called from. And then of course, the DCF abuse hotline. Let's go to the next slide. So again, you all are great. You talked about the services you could provide to Elena. You know that there are many more. We clearly have lots of counseling, trauma, maybe the faith community. We talked about perhaps the help. We need to talk to her about maybe her help with substance use issues, which by the way are very common as coping mechanisms with survivors. You've named some of the referrals. You'd refer people out. And please know again that STAC would be here to assist. Even I've gotten calls before with people who've said, hey, Robin, I think she might be trafficked. I don't know. What do you think my next step would be? We'll walk you through all that. So that would be, that's another thing that you can always do. Use us as a sounding board and just kind of, talk about it. By the way, Anthony, I want to mention too, one of the other things, we can go to the next slide. One of the other things is we've done some monthly trainings. One of the trainings we did recently was on social media and how kids are seduced into sex trafficking on social media. You can go on STAC's website under our educational resources and knowing more, and you can actually see a 2-hour training on that issue. Here's some of your next steps. Knowing the signs. We have a Big Bend Coalition Against Human Trafficking. Would love for you all to join that and be part of it. Incorporating human trafficking into everything you're doing now. Trafficking's not new. You've been seeing people who've been trafficked since the beginning, right? They've been exploited and forced into labor situations. So you've got a bunch of phone numbers too. We want to work with you. We'd love to cross-train with you. So know that that's there. Could we have the next slide? Sometimes you might need to modify your current procedures, your handbooks, your policies for working on human trafficking cases. We can help you with that. Just know that we're there for that. The next slide has a lot of resources. That's why this would be cool if you could get a copy of the PowerPoint. Know that there's tons there, and know that the very bottom, one of the things Stack did, and one of our first things we did, is we pulled together a directory of services. Would you all please do me a favor, a giant favor, and go to that directory, see if you're in there, and if you're not, let's get you in there as a referral point for people who are looking to have assistance on human trafficking, or maybe they'll need your help with someone who's trafficked. You obviously all have the basics now, and you could provide that, but we'd love to include you in our directory of services. And we also want you to know that directory of services is there for you to use. You don't need to call us, just go on there. And somebody called one time and said, I need to know who my point of contact is in the Havana Police Department. Well, guess what? We have that. So, so know that that's a service for you. The very last slide that we have here is our contact information. Again, I want you to please call us if you have any questions. One of the things we've been doing, by the way, I mentioned it in Anthony's comment, had a comment about the social media and kids. 2 months ago, we did a training on that. Last month, we did a training on working with underserved populations. This month, we're doing another training on human trafficking in the schools. That's on June 19th. These are free certificate-based trainings. We'll have a representative from the Department of Education present on human trafficking and what the schools are doing. Really, really super important. These trainings happen every third Friday. So if you haven't already, go on to our website, check it out. You can sign up for our newsletters, like us on Facebook, and you'll get all the information. You can sign up, and what we do is we give you a certificate so it can count toward perhaps your internal training programs. So Graciela, I have nothing else to add. What about you? Do you have anything you'd like to conclude us?
No, I have been trying to answer some questions here in the chat. And I think if anyone has any questions.
Bridget had one question about seniors. And as you all are going back to her question, I just want to make sure everyone knows that I will just go ahead and send the PowerPoint out to the group. That way everyone will have it. I've heard from a couple people, but remember, if you need CEUs, please reach out to me and I will be sure to get that to you all.
And yes, please, college students is a great audience for these trainings, and for any of the trainings. We take our trainings that we do every third Friday for the last 2 months. We put them online. We've had over 600 people around the state and nation attend these trainings. So really would love for you to join us as well. And did Bridget have another question? What is the receiving referral of seniors?
She had a question about seniors. I don't know, Bridget, if you want to, it's kind of way up.
I can restate, LaShawn, it's fine.
Okay.
And I apologize, I was having bandwidth issues for my video being off, but I was curious about the number of referrals for seniors that y'all might receive through the work that you do.
Yeah, Graciela?
Yeah, I wrote in the message that we don't have a lot, but we do have some referrals. In my experience,
and would you say there are those that would already qualify as vulnerable population status, or not necessarily?
It is really hard to say because I think they would. However, my experience with a few referrals have been people that had some kind of mental illness. And what we have done is we just super double, triple check that they are safe, and Robin has helping me a lot with that. So we called whoever we need to call, DCF, and we do what we need to do to make sure that that person is safe. I don't know if I am answering your question.
And if we had a longer time to do training, we would talk about cases where we have seen seniors who are, you know, around the country who are trafficked and exploited. Again, their vulnerabilities are exploited, and it could be by family members or it could be by organized crime.
All righty, y'all know how I feel about time. So thank you again for joining us. Justin did put a resource guide in the chat. Justin, if you can email that to me, I'll be sure to send that out as well. Look for part 2 because there will definitely be a part 2. It's a rainy day in Tallahassee. You all be safe, and we will see you soon. Thanks again, Robin and Graciela. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.